The grand hall of the Viraxian Noble Assembly sparkled with crystal lights that hung from its high ceiling like frozen stars. Dr. James Chen stood quietly in a corner, adjusting the collar of his formal Earth diplomatic uniform. He felt out of place among the tall, silver-skinned Viraxian nobles who glided across the polished floor in their flowing robes. James wasn't supposed to be here. As a human medical researcher, he usually spent his days in his laboratory at the outskirts of the capital city. But the invitation had come directly from the assembly, and his superiors had insisted he attend. Building relationships, they had called it. James thought it felt more like being put on display. The Viraxians watched him with their large purple eyes. Some whispered behind their long-fingered hands, while others simply stared. James had gotten used to the attention over his 2 years on their world, but tonight felt different. The air seemed charged with anticipation. Baron Kithrix's arrival changed everything. The noble was famous across 3 star systems for his wealth, power, and cruel sense of humor. He entered the hall like a storm, his silver robes swirling around him, flanked by servants who scrambled to keep up with his long strides. "Ah, the human healer." Kithrix's voice boomed across the hall. The other nobles quickly formed a circle, sensing entertainment was about to unfold. "Come forward, Dr. Chen. I have heard much about your primitive medical practices." James stepped forward, keeping his face neutral. He had dealt with enough alien politicians to know when he was being baited. "You honor me with your attention, Baron Kithrix." The Baron's purple eyes glittered with malice. "Honor? Oh yes, I intend to honor you greatly tonight." He clapped his hands, and his servants wheeled in what looked like a floating chair. In it sat a young Viraxian female, her silver skin dulled to a pale gray, her slender body supported by cushions. "This is my daughter, Lady Zara," Kithrix announced. "A defective specimen, unfortunately. Paralyzed since childhood. Our best healers could do nothing." His voice dripped with false sadness. "But surely a human doctor, with all your species' claimed medical advances, could succeed where we have failed." The assembled nobles tittered with laughter. James looked at Zara, really looked at her. Despite her father's cruel words, her eyes blazed with intelligence. Her hands, though immobile, showed the slight tremors characteristic of neural pathway disruption, not the complete deterioration he would expect from an untreatable condition. "Therefore," Kithrix continued, his voice rising for dramatic effect, "I gift her to you, human. Surely your superior medical knowledge can succeed where Viraxian science has failed." The laughter grew louder. "Unless, of course, you wish to admit your limitations." The hall fell silent, waiting for James to stumble through an embarrassed refusal. Instead, he walked forward and knelt beside Zara's chair. "My lady," he said softly, "would you be interested in exploring treatment options? I believe your condition shows signs of being reversible." The shocked silence that followed was broken by Kithrix's bark of laughter. "You cannot be serious. You would actually accept this joke?" James stood, meeting the Baron's eyes steadily. "On Earth, we have a saying. The best jokes are the ones that unexpectedly turn out to be true." He turned to Zara. "If you are willing, we can begin preliminary examinations tomorrow." Zara's eyes widened, and for a moment, James saw a flicker of hope cross her face. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I accept Dr. Chen's offer, Father. Or was your gift not genuine?" Thrix's face darkened with rage, but he was trapped by his own public proclamation. The other nobles watched with growing interest as the Baron's joke transformed into something entirely unexpected. "Very well," Kithrix spat. "Take her. But remember, human, when you fail, everyone will know the truth about Earth's vaunted medical science." As James guided Zara's floating chair toward the exit, he heard the nobles buzzing with excitement behind them. But his focus was on the medical scanner in his pocket, which had already detected exactly what he'd suspected. Treatable genetic markers that Viraxian medicine had overlooked. The joke, it seemed, was just beginning. The human medical facility sat at the edge of the capital city, its white walls gleaming in the light of Verax's twin suns. Inside, Dr. James Chen carefully studied the results of Lady Zyra's initial scans while she watched him from her floating chair. "You're not what I expected," Zyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was stronger now that they were away from her father's presence. "Most people either pity me or ignore me. You do neither." James looked up from his screens and smiled. "That's because I see a patient, not a problem." He turned one of the displays so she could see it. "Look at this. Your neural pathways are intact, just blocked. It's like a road that's been blocked by fallen trees. The road itself is fine. We just need to clear the way." Zira's large purple eyes widened as she studied the image. "Our healers said the paths were dead. They said nothing could be done." "Veraxian medicine is advanced in many ways," James explained, using simple terms, "but sometimes looking at things differently helps. Human doctors learned long ago that the body wants to heal itself. We just need to help it along." He pressed a few buttons, and a new image appeared. "See these markers in your genetic code? They're not natural. Someone engineered this condition into your family line, probably generations ago." Engineered. Zyra's fingers twitched, the most movement she could manage. "You mean this was done on purpose?" "Yes, but that actually makes it easier to fix. It's like having a map of the damage." James pulled up another screen. "We've developed treatments for similar conditions on Earth, with some adjustments for Veraxian biology." We cooled. A loud crash from the hallway interrupted him. Two of Zira's servant attendants burst in, looking flustered. "My lady, your father demands daily reports of your treatment," one servant stammered. "He wants proof that the human is actually trying to help you." Zira's face hardened. "Of course he does. He's hoping to prove this is all a waste of time." She turned to James. "My father has spent years telling everyone I'm worthless. He won't like it if you prove him wrong." James nodded thoughtfully. "Then we'll be careful. But we won't stop." He walked over to a cabinet and returned with a small device. "This is a neural stimulator. It sends tiny signals through your nervous system, like testing a wire to see where it's blocked. Would you like to try it?" "Will it hurt?" Zyra asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It might feel strange, maybe a little uncomfortable, but it shouldn't hurt. We can stop any time you want." Zyra looked at the device, then at her immobile hands, and finally at the servants who were watching nervously. "Do it," she said firmly. "I want to know what's possible." James carefully attached the stimulator to her wrist. As he activated it, Zyra gasped. I can feel tingles in my fingers. It's faint, but that's excellent." James adjusted some settings. "It means the pathways are responding. With time and the right treatment, we can strengthen these connections." Tears formed in Zyra's eyes, but her voice remained strong. "All these years, I've been watching, listening, learning, while everyone assumed I was just an empty shell. I've seen how the noble houses really work. I know their secrets." She looked at James with fierce determination. "If you can help me move again, I can change things." James saw the intelligence burning in her eyes and understood. She hadn't just been a prisoner in her body. She'd been gathering information, forming plans, waiting for a chance. "We'll start the real treatment tomorrow," he said. "For now, let's see what else this stimulator can tell us." As the twin suns set outside, casting rainbow shadows through the facility's crystal windows, hope began to take root in a place where it had long been absent. The morning calm at the medical facility was shattered by the arrival of Baron Kithrix and his guards. Their heavy boots echoed through the halls as they marched toward James's laboratory. The Baron's silver robes swirled around him like angry storm clouds. "Where is my daughter?" Kithrix's voice boomed through the facility. "I've come to take her home." James stood calmly in the doorway of his lab. Behind him, Zyra sat in her chair, her face set in determination. 3 days of neural stimulation had already brought some color back to her silver skin. Lady Zira is in the middle of treatment, James said firmly. Interrupting now could be dangerous. The Baron's purple eyes flashed with anger. Treatment? Don't make me laugh. You're just trying to avoid admitting failure. He pulled out a legal document. I've brought papers to reclaim my property. Property? Zira's clear voice cut through the tension. Is that what I am, Father? A thing to be given away and taken back? Thrix's face darkened. You dare speak to me this way? This human has filled your head with nonsense. Guards, take her. Wait. James stepped forward. You gave Lady Zira to me as a gift before witnesses. Under Viraxian law, you can't simply take back a formal gift. The Baron sneered. You've been studying our laws, have you? Well, then you should know that gifts can be reversed if they're misused. Then let's settle this properly. James pulled out his tablet. I've been reading about an old Viraxian custom called the Healer's Challenge. The guards looked at each other nervously. Even Thrix seemed surprised. If a healer claims they can cure someone, James continued, they can challenge anyone who doubts them. The healer gets one planetary cycle to prove their success. If they win, their patient is free to choose their own path. If they lose, he paused meaningfully. If they lose, they forfeit everything they own to the challenger. Thrix finished, his eyes gleaming with sudden interest. You would risk your entire facility on this. Yes. James stood straight. One planetary cycle, 6 Earth months, to help Lady Zira walk again. If I fail, you get my facility and all my research. The Baron laughed. And when you succeed, if you succeed, what do you want? Nothing. James glanced at Zira. Lady Zira gets her freedom. That's all. Thrix studied James carefully. You really believe you can do this, don't you? His mouth curved into a cruel smile. Very well. I accept your challenge. One planetary cycle to achieve the impossible. He walked over to Zira, bending down to whisper, Enjoy your false hope, daughter. When he fails, you'll learn your place once and for all. After the Baron and his guards left, Zira turned to James. You shouldn't have done that. You could lose everything. James checked the neural stimulator's readings. Your father thinks he's setting a trap for me, but he doesn't understand something important about human doctors. What's that? We're used to beating impossible odds. James adjusted the stimulator settings. Besides, I've seen your latest scans. The treatment is already working better than expected. Zira looked at her hands, where the faintest twitch of movement was visible. 6 months isn't very long. No, James agreed. But sometimes having a deadline helps. Shall we get back to work? Outside the facility, news of the challenge spread quickly through the capital. Bets were placed, sides were chosen, and everyone waited to see if the human doctor would achieve the impossible or lose everything he had built. The race against time had begun. 1 month into the treatment, the medical facility buzzed with activity. Dr. James Chen had assembled a small but dedicated team. 2 human genetic specialists and 3 Viraxian medical apprentices who were brave enough to defy tradition. The gene therapy is ready, James announced, holding up a vial of softly glowing blue liquid. This will help your body repair the blocked neural pathways. Zira lay on the treatment bed, her silver skin shimmering under the medical lights. The neural stimulator on her wrist had become a familiar companion, its gentle pulses now reaching all the way to her fingertips. Will it hurt? Asked Tulin, one of the Viraxian apprentices. Yes, James answered honestly. As the nerves wake up, there will be pain. But we'll be monitoring everything carefully. He turned to Zira. Are you ready? Zira took a deep breath. I've been ready my whole life. James injected the blue liquid into her arm. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then Zira gasped. It burns, she cried out, her body trembling. Everything burns. The monitoring devices beeped rapidly. James checked the readings, his face serious but calm. Your nerve endings are reactivating. Try to focus on my voice. The pain will pass. Zira gritted her teeth, tears streaming down her face. The other doctors watched nervously as the minutes ticked by. Finally, the trembling stopped. "Can you try moving your fingers?" James asked softly. Zira stared at her right hand. Slowly, shakily, her index finger lifted. Just a tiny bit, but it moved. "I did it," she whispered in amazement. "I actually moved it." The room erupted in quiet cheers, but their celebration was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Lady Virex, one of the noble house leaders, burst into the room. "So it's true," she declared. "You're torturing the poor girl." We could hear her screams from outside. "It's not torture," Zira said firmly, her voice tired but strong. "It's healing. Look." She lifted her finger again, drawing a gasp from the noble lady. "Impossible." Lady Virex stepped back. "You're using some kind of trick." "No tricks," James explained patiently. "Just medicine. The pain happened because her nerves are working again. Like when a sleeping limb wakes up, it hurts at first, but that means it's healing." "The noble houses won't stand for this," Lady Virex warned. "You're disrupting the natural order." Zira laughed softly. The natural order. Was it natural when our ancestors engineered these disabilities into their own children? "Don't pretend you don't know, Lady Virex. I've heard the whispers in the great halls." The noble lady paled. "You don't know what you're talking about." She turned and hurried from the room. After she left, Tillin looked worried. "She'll spread rumors about the treatment. People will say terrible things." "Let them," Zira said, still staring at her moving finger with wonder. "They can't stop us now." She looked at James. "How soon until the next treatment?" "Tomorrow," James replied. "But first, you need rest. Moving that finger used muscles that haven't worked in years. We'll start exercises to strengthen them." As the team prepared to move Zira to her recovery room, she caught James's hand with her newly responsive fingers. Her grip was weak, but it was there. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the treatment, but for believing it was possible." James smiled. "This is just the beginning. Soon you'll be doing much more than moving fingers." That night, as news spread through the capital about Zira's screams and her moving finger, opinions divided sharply. Some called it a miracle, others a dangerous disruption. But in her room at the facility, Zira slept peacefully, dreaming of the day she would stand on her own 2 feet and change everything. 3 months into the treatment, Zira could move both her hands and feel sensation down to her waist. Each day brought new progress, and with it, new enemies. James arrived early one morning to find a laboratory door slightly open. Strange, since he always locked it at night. Inside, something felt wrong. He checked the security cameras first. They had been turned off during the night. "Tillin," he called to his Viraxian apprentice who had just arrived. "Help me check everything." They found the sabotage quickly. The gene therapy samples in the cooling unit had been contaminated. The neural scanning equipment was damaged. Even worse, someone had tampered with Zira's next treatment dose. If we had used this, Tillin's hand shook as she held up the contaminated vial. It could have paralyzed her permanently. James's face darkened. Or worse, "We need tow." Dr. Chen, another apprentice, rushed in. "Lady Zira's transport is arriving, but there are reporters outside. They're saying terrible things about the treatment." James looked out the window. A crowd had gathered, led by several noble houses. They held signs calling the treatment unnatural and cruel. Zira's transport arrived, smoothly gliding through the crowd. But instead of looking worried, she was smiling. "Good morning, Dr. Chen," she said as she entered the lab. "I see Father's friends have been busy. You knew this would happen." Zira's smile turned clever. "During all those years being ignored at noble gatherings, I learned to read people. The noble houses don't fear my recovery. They fear what it means." She held up a data crystal. So I took precautions. What kind of precautions? Evidence, records, secrets. Her fingers, now able to grasp small objects, turned the crystal. Every whispered conversation they had in front of the helpless girl, every scheme they planned. I remember it all. James frowned. But the sabotage will stop immediately, Zyra finished. Because in 1 hour, copies of some very interesting recordings will be sent to every news channel on Verax. Unless, of course, my treatment continues without interference. Tlin gasped. You're blackmailing the noble houses. No, Zyra corrected. I'm protecting myself, and Dr. Chen, and everyone else they've hurt with their natural order. She turned to James. They hurt people like me to keep control. But they forgot something important. What's that? When you trap someone in their own body for years, they learn to use their mind instead. Every secret, every scheme I heard, I kept it all. Her eyes flashed. They thought I was just furniture in the room. Now they'll learn how wrong they were. James quickly checked the backup lab he'd secretly prepared weeks ago. All their real samples and equipment were safe there. We should move your treatment to the secure facility, he said. Zyra nodded. Yes, but first, watch. On her portable screen, they saw noble houses across the city receiving her message. Within minutes, the crowd outside began to disappear. The reporters left. The protesters vanished. How did you plan all this? Tillin asked in amazement. I had years to think about it, Zyra replied. And now I have hands that can make those plans real. She turned to James. Shall we continue with today's treatment? I believe I'm scheduled to try moving my toes. James smiled, impressed by his patient's cleverness. He'd been protecting her, but she'd been protecting him too. Yes, let's continue. But maybe you should tell me more about these contingency plans of yours. Don't worry, Doctor, Zyra said as they headed to the secure lab. I got everything covered. After all, I learned from the best plotters in the noble houses. I just learned to do it better. Above the city, storm clouds gathered, but inside the facility, hope and determination burned brighter than ever. 4 months into the treatment, James sat in his secure lab late at night, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. He had been reviewing Zyra's latest genetic scans when he noticed something strange, a pattern he'd seen before. This can't be right, he muttered, pulling up files of other genetic conditions he'd studied on Earth. Unless. The door slid open, and Zyra wheeled herself in. She could now control her chair without help, her arms strong enough for the controls. You should be resting, James said without looking up. I felt something was wrong, Zyra replied. You missed dinner. You never missed dinner. James turned his screen toward her. Look at this pattern in your genetic code. Now look at this one. He showed her another image. This is from an Earth history file about genetic engineering. They're almost identical. Zyra leaned forward. What does that mean? Your condition wasn't an accident or a natural mutation. James highlighted several sections of code. This was designed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The paralysis can be turned on and off with the right treatment. Turned on and off. Zyra's voice shook with anger. You mean someone did this to my family on purpose? James nodded grimly. And not just your family. He showed her more files. I found similar patterns in medical records from other noble houses, always in the younger children, never the heirs, always appearing around age 5 or 6. Zyra's hands gripped her chair's controls tightly. The age when children start showing signs of independence, when they might challenge their older siblings. Exactly. James pulled up an old document. According to this, about 300 years ago, several noble houses hired genetic engineers from across the galaxy. The official reason was to improve their bloodlines. But they really wanted a way to control their children. Zyra finished. To make sure only the right ones had power. Her eyes narrowed. That's why they're so afraid of your treatment. It doesn't just help me. It exposes their whole system. A soft beep came from one of the machines monitoring Zyra's progress. James checked it quickly. "Your anger is making your heart rate spike," he said gently. "Try to stay calm. We need to think about this carefully." Carefully? Zyra laughed bitterly. They crippled their own children to keep power. They're still doing it. How many others are there like me? Locked away, told they're defective, when really they're just inconvenient. James sat down beside her. "What do you want to do?" Zyra was quiet for a moment. "We have to tell everyone. Not just about my recovery, but about all of it. The engineering, the control, everything. The noble houses will fight back hard," James warned. "They might try worse things than sabotage." "I know." Zyra straightened in her chair. "But think about all the children who could be helped. And their children. This has to stop." James nodded. "Then we'll need proof. Undeniable evidence." "The proof is in their own genetic code," Zyra said. "In mine. In every child they've hurt." She looked at her hands, which now moved freely. "We can show everyone that this paralysis isn't natural. It's a tool for control. It will change everything on Verax," James said quietly. Zyra's face set with determination. "Good. Some things need to change." She turned to him. "Will you help me?" "Of course." James began copying files to a secure drive. "But first, we need to protect ourselves. Once we release this information, there's no going back." Outside the lab, the twin moons of Verax cast strange shadows. Inside, two people from different worlds prepared to expose a centuries-old conspiracy and change their society forever. The news spread through the capital like wildfire. Zyra's medical records, along with proof of the genetic engineering program, appeared on every communication channel. Within days, the quiet medical facility became the center of a storm. James watched from his office window as another group of nobles arrived. But these weren't protesters. They were parents carrying or wheeling their defective children. "That's the third group today," Thielen said, checking the visitor logs. "They all want to know if we can help their children too." Inside the main treatment room, Zyra sat in her chair, now able to move everything above her waist. A young noble girl sat across from her, paralyzed just like Zyra had been. "Were you scared?" the girl asked softly. "When you started feeling things again?" "Yes," Zyra answered honestly. "But being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're doing something important." The girl's father, a minor noble named Lord Cavil, watched with tears in his eyes. "All these years, they told us nothing could be done. That it was natural." "There was nothing natural about it," Zyra said firmly. She turned to James. "Show them the scan results." James displayed the genetic comparisons on the large screen. "See these patterns? They're exactly the same in your daughter's DNA. The paralysis was engineered to be reversible, if you know how." The high houses knew. Lord Cavell's hands clenched into fists. They knew there was a cure, and they kept it secret. "Control through suffering," Zyra explained. "Make the unwanted children helpless, then use their care as a way to keep their families in line." More families arrived throughout the day. James and his team worked nonstop, examining children and explaining the treatment process. Each new scan showed the same engineered patterns. By evening, the facility's waiting room was full of nobles, mostly from younger or lower-ranked houses. They shared stories, compared symptoms, and began to understand how deeply they'd been deceived. "We need more space," James told Zyra as they reviewed treatment schedules. "More equipment, more staff." "We'll get it," Zyra said confidently. The younger nobles are already pledging support. Even some of the older houses are starting to break ranks. A commotion outside drew their attention. Baron Kithrix had arrived, his face dark with rage. "You dare spread these lies?" he shouted at James. "You corrupt our children with your foreign ideas." "They're not lies, Father," Zyra called out, wheeling herself forward. The crowd parted to let her through. Every scan proves it. Every child here shows the same engineering. These families chose to come here, James added. They'd want help for their children. Help, Cathrix sneered. You're destroying centuries of tradition. Our ways. Your ways. Lord Cavil stepped forward, his paralyzed daughter in his arms. Your ways hurt our children. And for what? To keep power in the right hands. More parents joined in, their voices rising in anger and pain. Cathrix looked around, suddenly realizing he was surrounded by families who had suffered under the system he defended. This isn't over, he snarled, backing away. The high houses won't allow this chaos. After he left, Zyra turned to the crowd. Anyone who wants treatment for their child. We will help. It won't be easy. It will take time. But no more children will suffer for someone else's power. The families cheered. James watched as they began organizing themselves, sharing contact information, planning support groups. A movement was being born, right here in his medical facility. You know the high houses will strike back, he said quietly to Zyra. She nodded, her face determined. Let them try. They can't hide the truth anymore. And truth, once freed, has a power all its own. 5.5 months into the treatment, the great hall of the Noble Assembly was packed. Every noble house had gathered to witness Zyra's first public attempt to walk. Security was tight, but tension filled the air like static before a storm. James stood beside Zyra's chair, checking her vitals one last time. Are you sure about this? We could wait until. No more waiting, Zyra said firmly. She wore a simple silver robe, her legs visible beneath it. They need to see the truth with their own eyes. Baron Cathrix sat in the front row, his face unreadable. Behind him, dozens of families with paralyzed children watched hopefully. The treatment had already begun helping many of them, but this would be the first public demonstration. James activated the neural enhancers in Zyra's legs. She took a deep breath and grabbed the support bars they had installed. Remember, he whispered, just like we practiced. Slowly, Zyra pushed herself up. The room fell silent. Her legs trembled but held her weight. Then, gripping the bars, she took one step forward. The hall erupted in gasps. Some nobles stood up, pointing and shouting. Others just stared in shock. Another step, then another. Zyra's face showed her concentration and determination. Sweat beaded on her silver skin, but she kept moving. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the hall. Something whizzed past James's ear. A laser blast. Assassins! Someone screamed. Chaos erupted as nobles ran for the exits. But Zyra didn't fall. Instead, she grabbed one of the support bars and, with strength built from months of therapy, swung it toward a shadowy figure in the balcony. The bar knocked the weapon from the assassin's hands. James tackled another attacker who emerged from behind a pillar. His medical scanner picked up their vital signs. Members of the high houses, according to their genetic markers. Security forces rushed in, but they were confused about who to arrest. That's when Zyra's voice rang out, clear and commanding. Enough. She stood there, gripping one support bar, her legs shaking but holding firm. Look at me. Look at what they tried to keep hidden. I can walk because the paralysis was never natural. It was a tool of control. The crowd froze. Even the assassins stopped struggling. Your children can be helped too, she continued, taking another deliberate step. The treatment works because the condition was engineered to be reversible. They just didn't want you to know. One of the assassins broke free and rushed at her with a blade. But Zyra, using the movements she had practiced in secret, pivoted on her stronger leg and used the attacker's momentum to send them sprawling. The hall went silent again. Zyra stood tall, unassisted now, as security finally detained the assassins. The high houses thought this demonstration would be their last chance to stop us, she announced. Instead, they just proved how far they'll go to keep their power. But that power was built on the suffering of children, your children. Parents of paralyzed children moved forward, forming a protective circle around her. Other nobles, especially younger ones, joined them. Baron Kithrix had vanished in the chaos, but his absence spoke volumes. As medical teams checked for injuries, James caught Zyra's eye. She gave him a tired but triumphant smile. "Not bad for my first public appearance," she said. "Next time," he replied, helping her back to her chair. "Maybe we skip the assassination attempt." "Next time," she said firmly, "we'll be ready for anything. The real work is just beginning." The great hall buzzed with excited conversation as nobles rushed to enroll their children in treatment. The old order had cracked, and through that crack, hope was pouring in. 6 months had passed. The great hall of the noble assembly looked different now. The old, ornate thrones of the high houses had been replaced by simple chairs. Among those seated were previously paralyzed children, now able to walk and move freely. Zyra stood at the center of the hall, wearing the traditional robes of a medical council leader. She no longer needed any support to walk or stand. Behind her, Dr. James Chen watched proudly as she addressed the assembly. "One planetary cycle ago," she began, "my father gave me away as a joke. He thought he was showing human medicine's weakness. Instead, he revealed our own society's greatest shame." The crowd murmured. Baron Kithrix wasn't present. He had fled the planet after the assassination attempt failed. Many other high house leaders had followed him into exile. "Today," Zyra continued, "we open the first human Viraxian Medical Research Institute. Our goal is simple: to help everyone, not just those born into the right families." She gestured to the children in the audience who could now move freely. "Look at these young ones. They were told they were defective, broken, worthless. Now they run, dance, and dream of their own futures." James stepped forward with a data crystal. "We've successfully treated 237 children so far. The genetic reversal process is now standardized. Any medical facility on Verax can perform it. But this is just the beginning," Zyra added. "We've discovered other engineered conditions in our noble bloodlines. Conditions meant to control, to limit, to enforce obedience. We will find them all, and we will cure them all." Lord Kivil stood up, his daughter beside him. The girl who once couldn't move now walked confidently to the center of the hall. "My house pledges full support to the Institute," he announced. "No more children will suffer for power's sake." One by one, other nobles stood and pledged their support. Even some of the older houses, seeing the way the wind was blowing, joined in. Later, in the quiet of the medical facility, James packed his office. Earth had approved his request for a permanent research station on Verax. The facility would become the core of the new institute. "Ready to go home?" Zyra asked from the doorway. "This is home now," James replied. "At least for the next few years. Earth wants regular reports on how human and Viraxian medicine can work together." Zyra smiled. "And the Baron? Any word?" "Last reports put him heading toward the outer colonies, but without his wealth and connections, he's just another exile." "Good." Zyra walked to the window, still marveling at how easy it was to simply walk. "You know, he really did give me a gift that day. Just not the one he intended. Oh, he gave me a chance to help others, to change things." She turned to James. "Thank you for seeing me as a person, not a joke or a burden." "You did all the hard work," James said. "I just showed you it was possible. Sometimes that's all someone needs." Zyra straightened her medical council robes. "Now shall we go? The first class of combined human Viraxian medical students is waiting." Together, they walked through the facility that had become a symbol of hope. In the treatment rooms, more children were taking their first steps. In the laboratories, human and Viraxian doctors worked side by side, sharing knowledge freely. The joke that was meant to mock humanity's medicine had transformed into something powerful, proof that when people work together, nothing is impossible.